It hasn't always been like that. We all know that. If we go back to a couple of centuries ago, people with an interest in understanding the world and trying to think about how things work, and it was our place in the world, and making, you know, these reflections and having thoughts about it, were active in fields that we nowadays would classify as either art or science. Leonardo is a major example of that. He was very well known for his anatomical drawings and writings, as well as a very accomplished painter that also used some techniques like the sfumato here to create this impression of depth in Mona Lisa's painting. So he was clearly someone that was acting between the two. He was obviously not the only one, and for a couple of centuries you have people that were active on these two fields as we classify them today. Cyril and Marion is a very good example of a woman scientist and artist. We would call it like that nowadays. She would probably be classified nowadays as an entomologist with an interest in insect life cycles and metamorphoses, and she described a lot of insect life cycles in much detail, and she also illustrated what she was describing in very beautiful illustrations, as the one that you can see here with caterpillars and butterflies, and making the connection and describing how they would move from one life history stage to the other. Things started to diverge with, I would say, two cultural happenings. One was the separation of crafts from arts, and the other one was the start of science, the formal start of science, and the practice of science with very specific rules, with the scientific method that had been evolved. Nevertheless, you still have people in one field that has also been active in the other. In my field, in neuroscience, Ramon y Cajal is a leading example of this. He's very famous not only by his neuron doctrine in neuroscience, that he was the one that claimed that neurons are the units of the nervous system, but also by his drawings of neurons and different brain regions. But what maybe people in science is not so aware of is that he started his career with an interest in fine arts that his father did not allow him to pursue, and so he was forced in going into the medical school. This is one of his first paintings, while on canvas by Ramon y Cajal. He was also a fighter. He liked wrestling, and so he was also practicing photography in the early days of photography, with staged photography of classic poses of human bodies, like these ones. And he did photographs also of his art studio and lab, and there's a very nice collection of self-portraits that he took almost one per decade until his last day. So this is an illustration of that. If you have an interest, it's very nice to see how Cajal aged, because you have these portraits taken on a regular, and again, there's a pose. It's a typical self-portrait. So he was a photographer, he was a painter, he was a scientist, and he also wrote about color and about theory of color. So it's a prime example of someone that moved between the two fields, although he was clearly trained as a scientist. Alexander Fleming is another example. Apart from discovering penicillin, he was also doing these amazing microbial art paintings. This is very difficult to achieve, because to have these different colors back in the days that he was working, you would need to calculate precisely when to inoculate which microbe so that they would be ready at the same time to be used. And so that tells something about his technical skills as a microbiologist, as well as his more or less perhaps questionable taste as a painter, but nevertheless is another example. And then you have cross-fertilization between the two areas. You have not only people that are practitioners in one field that are also active in the other field, but you have examples of interactions between the two fields and examples of how one field influenced the other. This is Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome, which influenced the way that Donald Casper thought about the geometry of viruses. He was a crystallographer, life science person, biophysics, and they were trying to, based on these crystallography images, to decipher the structure of virus. And these complex structures of virus were inspired by Buckminster Fuller's geodesic domes, and there is evidence that they talk to each other, and Casper acknowledged some influence of Buckminster Fuller in the way he thought about the interpretation of these crystallography images that would lead him to the description of the virus models. And you have the reverse. You have, nowadays this is very common, contemporary artists that produce art pieces that reveal a deep knowledge about science and how things work. So I just pulled up two examples here from two contemporary artists that I particularly like. Anish Kapoor, this Ascension piece implies a vortex of water that is continuously moving, and in order to do this you have to know something about fluid mechanics and how to produce this, and to produce this that is constantly running. So basically as a pump that pumps up the water again, and the vortex that pulls the water down, and this has to be in balance such that the effect is permanently in place. And then you have Olafur Eliassen, your rainbow panorama that is installed in the rooftop of a building in Denmark, and basically it plays with angles of glass in relation to the incidence of light to create a rainbow that you can walk along. And again, you need to know something about physics of light in order to produce these effects. So these are examples that people in one field are pretty much aware of the other field, and there are blurred borders between the two fields. And then you have more explicit approaches to these interfaces. And one of the cases, and we have Susan here today that will give a keynote talk later this afternoon, that formally address this interface and that use metaphors and media from a specific area, in this case from biological sciences, to create art. And I picked up two examples. I did not pick any example from Suzanne because we will hear firsthand from her, but I picked two examples of bioart pieces that became very famous. This is Roberto Carvalho, a rabbit. That was a rabbit that was engineered by a French geneticist with GFP, to express GFP. There's a lot of controversy if the image is real or not, because the rabbit never left the lab in France, because once people became aware that there was a transgenic rabbit for aesthetic purposes, the geneticist got in trouble, and so the rabbit has never been exhibited, although it's one of the iconic pieces of bioart. It's also an example that sometimes media and the way we communicate things transform things and give meaning to things that sometimes never happened. So the Halbe has never been exhibited, but this image is in most textbooks of contemporary art and as an illustration of a bioart piece. And the other example is from Hitlerlui Hekborg. She was collecting cigarettes and chewing gum from people that dropped them on the floor in New York, and extracting DNA, and then looking into the presence of different haplotypes of genes that are related to the development of facial features. And based on that, she was doing these 3D facial images that are portraits based on the DNA. Obviously, this raises a number of issues, and it's you know, playing one of the roles of art, that is for, you know, promote discussion and promote discussion about genetics and genomics in our in nowadays, where this has quite an impact in our society, and so it's a way to promote discussion about these issues. You also have people that not only do this interface with the biological sciences, but also with technology and the use of technology in art. Lionel Moura is a Portuguese artist that is a good example of this. He has created these robots. In this case, I think it's Bebot, robot swarm that interact with each other and produce this robotic painting. And then he raises the question of who's the artist and where is the creative act. It's on the robot or in Lionel. We can discuss that with him this afternoon. So this was just a very short overview of this interaction, and I think, as I was trying to say in the beginning, I think the main question is if what is happening here is that you have two approaches to understanding reality, because I think both scientists and artists are people that are driven to understand reality with two different approaches, a more formal and objective approach in the sciences and a more subjective and internal reflection about reality from the arts. Or if by putting the two together you can create something different, the third culture that Ispa was mentioning, does that exist at all, or what you have is, you know, cross-fertilization of ideas, but epistemologically you have two different fields that will never be able to create something emergent from the interaction of the two. So to discuss this today, we prepared different parts. So the first one is to go back to the very beginning and to discuss what is common between these two practices, that is creativity. And then when you think about creativity, you have to think about, is it uniquely human? Can other beings in this planet also be creative? Nowadays, transhumanism is an issue in social sciences and arts. It's less so in science, I would say. But we will start there, and we have Leo Fusani that will talk about animal creativity and aesthetics. Then we move on to creativity in humans and how art emerged in humans, and we have João Zilhão to address that. And then Teresa Garcia Marques, psychologist from Ispa, cognitive and social psychologist, will address what we are talking about. So what is creativity and what is exactly what we are talking about when we discuss creativity. And Nico Bonacci, also from Ispa, will be sharing this session and promoting discussion. And the way this works is that each one of these invited speakers will give a short address to introduce the topic. There will be no questions, specific questions after the end of each talk, and then we'll have half an hour at the end of the three talks where we can have an open general discussion where I hope the audience will also be involved and actively participating. Then the second session will be on art, science and society. Lionel Moura will talk about how to do art using AI and robotics, and how to take advantage of technology to produce art. Erlinda Oliveira will do the other perspective and try to question if AI can have creativity or promote creativity. Erlindo is someone from Instituto Universitário, so he's a scientist working on AI. And then António Gomes da Costa, that is active in the Science and Society program at the Gulbenkian. We'll discuss this topic, how these things interact in our societies nowadays, and we have asked Pedro Ferreira, also a neuroscientist that is now engaged into science communication, to share this session. And finally, we'll have the third session where we will see how art and science that have been drifting apart can rejoin. I will talk about my experience from the science side on how art can, you know, be beneficial or influence science and scientists, how scientists can engage with art in a meaningful way. Then Marta Diniz was supposed to talk about bioart and the interface, because she has been developing together with her partner in life and in science a project that mixes up molecular biology and art. Unfortunately, Marta texted us yesterday saying that she got COVID and she cannot show up today because she cannot, you know, be in public. And then we will have art inspired by biological science, I think by Hugo, that might share with us how, you know, biology in particular and the love for the deep sea has been inspiring him to produce his creative practice. And we had Julia with us to promote discussion in this panel. And then finally we have a closing act by Susan that will give a keynote talk on cultures of entanglement, and this will be basically an example of someone that is active in the interface between these two cultures and is doing bioart projects and was one of the pioneers of bioart more than 50 years ago. More? Right, well, 15 years it's good. We don't need to go further. And with this, I finish this introduction. I thank you for being here, and I would now invite the first panel to move here and to start the discussion. Please feel free to move around. As I said, this shouldn't be a formal, although the chairs have this disposition that create, you know, us and them kind of spatial arrangement. You should feel free to come to the front, grab food, interact with speakers verbally, and feel at home to participate. So, if you guys want to move there.